This is Aspas, Valorant's GOAT. Well, as close as you can get to a GOAT after only 4 seasons of pro play. He's Valorant's greatest and most consistent player, with near-perfect mechanics. He won champions in his rookie year, and has been a top 3 duelist in the world every year since. And this is Made in Brazil, or MIBR, the worst performing team across the whole VCT last year, seen as a free win for any opponent in Tier 1 Valorant.
Jamais se perderá nas entrelinhas dessa história. É que estamos entre aspas.
So how the hell did this happen? The story begins at the end of the 2022 season after Loud had just beaten Optic to win champions. Loud was the Brazilian super team. Sadak and Sassy were the experienced veterans, Aspas and Les were the young prodigies, and Pancada was the cracked but very chill smokes player. They made it to second place in their first international tournament as a team at Masters Reykjavik, and then went on to win champions by the end of the year. It was a huge win for Loud and the whole of Brazil, and the region celebrated like it. One of their teams was the best in the world. But that team was about to split apart. Because they just won champions, other teams wanted to take parts of the roster for themselves, and with different teams bidding huge amounts of money for individual players, Loud didn't have the money to offer all of them higher salaries to keep the team together. Rumours began to circulate as to who would be leaving the team, and eventually it was confirmed. Sassy and Pancada were moving to Sentinels. It might seem odd that 2 Brazilian players would go and join a North American team, but with the introduction of Valorant franchising in 2023, North America, Brazil and Latin America would all be playing in the same league anyway. The Americas League brought all of the franchise teams from NA, Brazil and LATAM to LA to play against each other under one roof, and so Sentinels dropped the bag to pick up 2 world champions. It was undoubtedly a loss for Loud, but they had a backup plan. Sassy and Pancada were replaced with 2 new Brazilian rookies, Kawanzine and Tuis. Now that Aspas and Les had more experience at the top level, the idea was that they would become the veterans of the team along with Sadak and mentor the 2 new guys. And it worked. Loud instantly showed success at lock-in, barely missing out on the trophy in front of their home crowd. A second place finish was very impressive though, and they continued to play well throughout the Americas League, eventually winning the entire thing. Aspas completely dominated the competition throughout that run, with some insane stats by the end of the tournament. But a different team in the Americas League weren't quite playing as well. MIBR had been selected as one of 3 Brazilian orgs for Valorant franchising, along with Loud and Furia. They had a rich history in FPS games, with successful CS and Rainbow Six teams, and had been competing in Brazil's challenger scene for a while, so it made sense that Riot chose them for the new era of VCT. Unfortunately, their 2023 roster was not very inspiring. A team of Tier 2 Brazilian players led by inconsistent duelist Heat was a recipe for disappointment. They were sent home after the first round of lock-in, at least it was a short journey, and ended the Americas League regular season with a 3-6 record, missing out on playoffs and taking 100 Thieves with them. The first game of the season for MIBR and Loud was actually against each other, and Aspas almost single-handedly won the game, with plus 28 kills across the series. It was a tale of 2 Brazilian teams at complete opposite ends of the spectrum, one challenging for international titles, the other missing out on regional playoffs. As the year continued, Loud and Aspas eventually finished 3rd at Champions, almost reverse sweeping EG in a dramatic lower final, and MIBR lost to Crew in the first round of the Americas LCQ. But despite Loud's extremely solid year, Aspas was ready for a new challenge. He'd already won domestic and international championships with Loud, and with his contract ending, he felt it was time to move on, somewhere that he could look to win not just one trophy, but all of them. Leviathan wanted to move away from just being a LATAM team for 2024, and with their duelist player Taco Leah leaving the team, they needed to find someone to replace him, and luckily for them, Aspas was up for it. And with Tex signing from the Guard, Leviathan was officially an international powerhouse. Aspas, Tex, King, Mazzino, and Noswa. And as a bonus, Aspas and Noswa were also already really good friends, and so the team chemistry was taken care of. The community was excited to see how Aspas would play on a different team, because this was his first season not on Loud, but if he was comfortable on this roster, there was no reason he wouldn't still be at the top of the Valorant scene. Fast forward to Christmas Eve 2023, about a month before the new VCT season was due to start. Leviathan were holding a player meeting, likely the last thing they were going to do before taking a break for Christmas Day. But this wasn't a very merry time. Internal conflicts between the players had eventually exploded, leading to some of the players asking for Noswa to be kicked from the team. The issues couldn't be solved, and so in the end, Noswa was dropped from the roster, and Aspas was not happy. I mean, his friend had just been kicked from his team on Christmas Eve. Of course he was angry. It was even reported that Aspas tried to leave Lev after this whole situation went down, but because the fine for breaking his contract was so high, he decided against it. The atmosphere within Leviathan was extremely tense, but Aspas was stuck with the team for the rest of the year. But it wasn't all bad news. Leviathan did find someone to replace Noswa, and in fact this replacement was actually a world champion, Com from EG. He joined the team soon after, and now they were somewhat of an international super team. After all, Com and Aspas were arguably the two best players on their roles in the world. But none of that really mattered if they couldn't sort out the team atmosphere. Only time would tell. And on the other side of things, MIBR didn't change a whole lot. 3 new Brazilian players came in, but the general structure of the team remained intact. And as the season played out, a lot stayed the same. Aspas was still incredible, and MIBR was still not great. Leviathan didn't quite reach the same heights as Loud, even though they did eventually finish 3rd at Champions, and MIBR finished the regional season of the Americas League dead last, losing 9 games in a row before winning a meaningless final match to end up with a 1-9 record. And nobody expected much to change in the 2025 season either. MIBR seemed pretty content with being a bottom feeder team, and with reports of them using Riot's money to fund their CSGO team, which were later proven false, most people thought they would never bother to invest heavily in Valorant. And Aspas still wanted out of Leviathan, but with a big money move to Bleed on the table, he would get his wish and head over to the Pacific League. Well, until the entire organisation of Bleed turned out to be a massive scam. It turns out Bleed were offering to pay Aspas with money they should have paid to their current team, who were still waiting for payments from the previous season. That unveiled a huge mess, which eventually led to Bleed getting fully kicked out of the league, and left Aspas teamless. With Sadak and Les moving over to Europe, there was no point in him going back to Loud, and so it seemed like he would be benched for the 2025 season, because Leviathan had already signed Demon 1. The best player in Valorant history benched. It didn't feel right. In fact, Aspas going to Leviathan in the first place felt a bit weird. He had made his name on the Brazilian ranked ladder, his professional debut was with a Brazilian team, and he'd won his first trophy, the World Championship, for the Brazilian region. It was time for Aspas to go home.
E melhor que levar o Brasil no peito é levar o Brasil à glória. Somos nós contra o mundo. E por vocês, o MIBR joga.
Out of nowhere, reports emerged that MIBR had agreed a deal with Lev to sign Aspas. They had decided to go all in on Valorant for the 2025 season, and it meant that Valorant's greatest ever player was now back in Brazil on MIBR. But it wasn't just Aspas and 4 random players, he actually helped build the team from the ground up, and you already know who he was going to sign.
Estamos juntos por algo maior.
Noswer and Aspas were reunited, the first time since he'd been dropped from Leviathan on Christmas Eve. Next came the challenge of finding the hidden gems of the Brazilian Tier 2 scene, but they seem to have found some great talents. MIBR have kept Artzine, who was probably their best player last year, on the initiator role, picked up Xenom as their smokes player, and finally signed Cortesia on Sentinel. They've already played one tournament in the off-season, where they finished second behind a Furia team in really good form. Aspas looked as good as ever, and Cortesia surprised everyone with his insane mechanics, ending the tournament with a ridiculous 51% headshot rate. If he can keep that up and Aspas can keep looking like the best player in the world, MIBR might, for the first time, be a real contender in VCT Americas. We'll have to see how 2025 turns out for this team, but even if they don't win anything major, it's still a great move for Brazilian Valorant and promising for the future of underperforming teams in the VCT. And with that, I've been Commend, subscribe if you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.